this tongue and heart in the middle here. Also, I wanted to, I guess, for us, it's a challenge to create. For us, one of the biggest challenges is how do you create art works which do not look like artworks. And what I mean by that is that we live in an era of art happens to be the zeitgeist of the moment. It wasn't the case 20 years ago, but it happens to be today. So, and much art looks from 100 meters away. It's very clear it's art. It's sort of solemn, very sort of serious. This is an example for me of, this is a tongue that becomes a heart, but it's obviously playing with kind of the codes of a parallel art that you would see in a trashy gallery in Place des Vosges in sort of Montmartre in Paris or something. It's playing with this kind of kitsch element, but it's also something which is very serious, is this idea of speaking from the tongue or the heart, right? When we say we speak from the heart, usually it goes from the heart to the brain, back to the tongue, and here it's kind of a contraction. It goes straight from the tongue to the heart. And also there's this kind of element of eroticism. If you notice here, it looks like other things. It looks like other sort of sexual organs. And what's interesting for us is that language is a necessarily erogenous, sort of sensual thing. All the organs of language, the tongue, the throat, the ears, the teeth, they're very erotic, erogenous, sensual areas. So, and of course the excerpt here is all about language in Lector. To go back to the question of sort of religion and state, seclusion and sort of participation in politics, art, of course, it's important that for us as well is that to kind of, in some sense, reclaim this. We hear a lot today that museums happen to occupy the role that libraries did in the 19th century. I think that's what I don't know if it's Chris or Nick Sorota, somebody from the Tate was mentioning. Chris can say that. Yeah. But if that's the case, which makes sense, the kind of idea of entertainment and education, the challenge is how do we reclaim the idea of art as a kind of transcendent, also metaphysical notion, because that gets lost a lot when you think about entertainment and education. And the reason why there's this, also the reason why you have these speakers in this form of book stands. These are book stands were usually used for holy books, for Qurans or for Sufi saint books. Similar here, this is kind of a rahle. This is a form that you usually use for. So let's maybe move away from the glass just in case. I'm a bit worried. And here, this room looks more at the questions of grooming. So grooming, very particularly grooming of the hair, grooming of, these are all glass combs that are in shapes of combs that we found in Xinjiang in Uyghuristan, in Western China, that were put onto sort of marked tombs. So each sort of family had its own shape of a comb, and this is called a kursi. A kursi is a place where a sheikh or a sheikha sits and recounts a reading, almost like a kind of an altar in some sense. And this piece is called a sheikha because one of the things that we're interested in questioning is, we know a lot about mirrors for princes, but the question is, what would be today kind of a mirror for princesses? What would be the kind of, we have female rulers, whether it's Angela Merkel or others, that are obviously, it's a concern not only about contemporary politics, but even 300 years ago, women sort of, Peter the Great, for example, he first allowed women in the nobility to mix with men, not because he was a feminist, but because he realized that if he wants to raise a generation of European enlightened Russians, the people who are going to raise them are the mothers. So the first question of education and etiquette, of course, no matter how much the state or the clergy wants to play a role, it's the mothers who are actually first inculcating these notions of education and etiquette. And in the vitrine, there's various pieces that deal with this question of hair that I'll talk briefly about, I guess. Okay. Yeah. We decided to look at hair because in this chapter particularly, because hair also, like the mirrors for princes itself, is something which has become completely desacralized. In the past 200 years, hair has become something which is cosmetic or about tribal. You know, you're a hippie or you're a dreadlocks or you're a punk. But actually, originally, or let's say for the past thousands of years, hair was always something which was extremely ritualistic and sacred. So if a woman, for example, was a widowed, she would shave her head and then enter society again to be able to marry. Or if a man was going to do a pilgrimage, he would not shave his beard because that would be a sign that he's concerned of worldly affairs. So all these things, again, about tweezing, eyelashes, hair, it has not only to do with sort of this question of grooming in a kind of in a holy sense, but also it has to do with the question of course of unruliness, right? Hair is a very sort of symbol of wild sexuality or of untamed civilization. So hair, for us, hair was very interesting because this question of justice and sort of political justice is that it's never a straight line, right? That the curls of hair, the attempt to straighten hair, the attempt to groom hair is an attempt essentially to put order on an unruly world, but also an unruly self, which is what the Mirrors for Princes we're looking at. Is we're thinking about not necessarily how to rule a nation here, but how to groom oneself, how to present oneself as a series of pluralities, as a series of nations. Inside of ourselves, we are many people, whether many languages, whether many allegiances, whether many ideologies that are not always homogeneous and sort of
I have a question there.
Yeah.
And for me, of course, it's always also meaningful what is, what one can see parallel in Kunsthalle. And Jana show language kind of fails as much as images fail. And you mentioned before, and I find that is a very important element in your work, that basically language provokes the product, provokes objects in a way. Often they are one-to-one, a translation of language into an object. And you intentionally do not speak about an art object. And there, of course, you can think of ethnographical objects, but then they're not, and you intentionally break also the reality of those. So what do we look at?
This is a good question. I mean, I think that for us, the successful pieces, and I think that we were very happy that when we heard that we were going to be at the same time as Jana, because I think that the question of language is a vehicle for concealing as much as revealing, as obfuscation as much as clarity is very important. That language is not just a transactional thing of I speak to you, you get an idea and you take it away and you speak back. There's something other happening in language. For us, the most successful pieces, and we don't know until later because this is the first kind of day they exist, is the pieces that are talismanic. So if the piece sends you somewhere else, or the pieces that we don't understand ourselves, I always find the most sort of challenging pieces are the pieces that we work on for 2 years. We research, sort of academic research, formal research, and the piece comes and we don't understand it. I mean, the Berlin Biennale piece, I still don't understand what this piece means, and I've been working on it for 2.5 years. And this is, I think there's similar here, is that the question, the kind of the art historical, or let's say the critical reception of the work, obviously as artists, it's not that we're just being humble, we really don't understand what it means as an art object. That's really, we're very strict about that. That's your jobs, in a sense. Our job is, in a sense, to kind of think of it as a kind of vehicle for ideas that escape us, in a sense. So I think that some of these pieces, and I think the best pieces are the pieces that can be used. So, the carpet, the installation there and a lot of our work is about installations where you can occupy this space. So much of art spaces are uncomfortable. The only spaces in the art environments usually you can sit down is a coffee shop or a bookstore. You have to buy something, and that says a lot about our society. I think that our cultural institutes are somehow uncomfortable. I always say that I understand if the Ministry of Finance is not a comfortable place to hang out, but if the museum is an uncomfortable place to hang out, then that's a problem. And this, of course, also has to do with threading. This is another piece to do with grooming and threading. Threading, again, which is a kind of an Eastern form of epilation. Instead of the machine, it's sort of taking your. I know that I need it because if I don't thread, I will be a werewolf. Kind of grow to my eyelids. So. Still downstairs.
Vico has pressed too.
Okay, so we just wrap up, yeah? 5 minutes. So this last room, the library room, this piece here is actually one of only two existing pieces that's shown here, and it's called Mystical Protest. And what it reads is, it says, "It is of utmost importance that we repeat our mistakes as a reminder to future generations of the depths of our stupidity." So this idea of defeatism, this advice literature that we're talking about, again here is this question of, in the very least, we should be aware of the kind of, and we should demonstrate how much we fail, because it'll at least be a kind of a warning to future generations, again, against this notion of positivism, that we know where we're going, that we can solve everything. You know, we hear a lot about big data recently. You know, with big data we can solve all the problems, with the e-economy we can solve the sort of financial crisis, but we don't believe in this at all, and I think that the past 4 or 5 years has shown this to be the case. And finally, the last two pieces are again rahles, these kind of holy book stands, but from which sort of unruly hair is growing. And you know, for books for us are really kind of sacred objects, and in the sense that, you know, when you read a book at age 15 or you read a book at age 50, if you read a book when you're in love or you're heartbroken, it has a completely different effect. And we have a piece that's called Kitab Kebab, which sort of is a kebab of books. I think this is very similar because it's again the notion of kind of the relationship to books is not always cerebral and analytical, what we taught in school. Sometimes the relationship to books is emotional, sometimes it's sensual, sometimes it's digestive. And this sort of tries to talk to those kind of more flirtatious, I guess, approaches to books as well.